Hey guys, welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. We're going to be continuing our study through the book of Revelation, looking at Revelation chapter 12 through 14 tonight, going into that fourth section of Revelation. Before we dive in, just a few announcements. The first is this Sunday at 4 o'clock, we'll be doing our first big summer bashes for kids. It's a great opportunity to reach out to our neighborhood. Thank you for all of you that walked different neighborhoods last Sunday, passed out flyers. Please make sure to let people in your neighborhood know. If you have family or friends that have children, please invite them. It's going to be starting at 4 o'clock. If you are helping out, and we definitely need helpers, please try to be there between 3 and 3:30. If you don't know exactly what to do, we will put you in a place where you can help out, whether you're helping out for 30 minutes or an hour or the whole time. Either way, we need people, that's for sure, to help us out in several different areas. We'll be doing a Bible study at 4 o'clock with the kids, and then they'll be getting a free dinner, and then move around to all the fun water games we'll be doing. And we are going to have some large water slides, sprinklers going, things from big kids to little kids. It's going to be a great time, and I'm hopeful that you can come and be a part of it. So that's really our major announcement that's coming up, and I hope that you're able to be a part of that this Sunday. Now, diving into the book of Revelation, chapter 12 through 14. So we are at the fourth of the 7 repeated visions of the end times. But this one's has a little bit of a change. It changes the dynamic. Where the first 3 were focused on this battle between the church and the world, this kind of physical battle that's going on. In chapters 12 through 22, we're going to see the deeper underlying cause for this, the background behind the scenes. It kind of pulls back the curtain a little bit and lets you see what's going on behind the scenes when it comes to this opposition between the church and the world. Because the opposition of the church and the world is just this outward manifestation of the spiritual war between Christ and Satan. And in this section, in 12, 13, and 14, we see the main characters of opposition rise up against Jesus, and they're introduced. We see this dragon, we see a beast of the sea, we see a beast of the earth, we see a harlot who's called Babylon, and we see men and women that have been taken the mark of the beast. Now, going forward in 15 and 16, we'll show what happens to those who take the mark, and 17 through 19 deals with the harlot and the 2 beasts, and in 20 through 22, the final defeat of the dragon. So that's where we'll be tonight. We're not going to read through all of these chapters, so I would encourage you to read along. We're going to point to a couple different verses, so you are going to need to have your Bible open. So if you haven't gotten that out yet, go ahead and grab that as we begin. I'm going to read the first 6 verses and start making some comments on that. I'm using a lot from a commentary by Hendrickson. Great commentary that's very helpful. So a lot of this is coming from him, and I would encourage you to look at that commentary to get more detailed notes. But starting in chapter 12, verse 1. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and with the moon under her feet, and with her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant, and crying out in birth pains, and the agony of giving birth. Another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads was 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, who was about to give birth, so that she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, who is one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she is placed and prepared by God, in which she is nourished for 1,260 days. So, lots of things going on there. We're not going to get into absolutely everything. Again, this is a quick overview of these 3 chapters. But just diving in, this radiant woman symbolizes the church, or the people of God. Both the people of the Old Testament before Christ's coming, and the people after the life, death, and resurrection of of Christ. So this is the church, as in the people of God for all time. And now on earth, the church may seem insignificant, especially at this time period. This has been the early days of the church. The church is under immense persecution. It may seem small and insignificant, and yet here it's described as this glorious woman with the sun and moon and stars all around her. So this glorious, splendorous woman, the idea of sun is the splendor. The moon shows her dominion, her authority, and this wreath of 12 stars shows her victory over all things. So even though the church seems small at this time, it may even now may seem powerless in some way, in the heavenly perspective, it's beautiful and amazing. The child, it seems to be pretty obvious, is Christ. It talks about that he will rule the nations with a rod of iron. That goes back to the second Psalm. And the dragon, of course, is Satan. He has these 7 crowns that shows his world dominion, and these 7 horns, which shows his destructive power. A horn, think of like a horn on a bull that goes on the attack. It's this strength, it's this power. And he's ready to destroy the child. He's at war with Christ. It says that he's so powerful that it even drags a third of these evil spirits in heaven down with him. And the main point of this picture right here in these first 6 verses is that Satan is constantly aiming at the destruction of Christ. In fact, the whole Old Testament is one story of the battle between Satan and the promises of God fulfilled in Jesus. You see it start in Genesis chapter 3. The serpent comes, and there's this promise that there would become one that would crush the head of the serpent. And every time God's people kind of take 2 steps forward, they take 3 steps back. It doesn't seem like successful until Christ comes, wins the full and final victory by crushing the head of the serpent with his death and resurrection for us. And then in 7 through 12, going on, it talks about this war in heaven, Michael fighting against this ancient serpent who's deceiving the world, and he's thrown down to the earth with his angels. There's this loud acclamation of salvation and power, talking about that the people have conquered by the blood of the Lamb, and there's this great rejoicing that goes on. We see Satan continues his attack against the church, but the Lord protects his people. This section, though, specifically shows the effect of Jesus' birth and atonement and ascension to the throne of heaven, where Satan isn't like literally like picked up and thrown down, but has lost his place as the accuser of the people of God, because he always could say, your people deserve wrath, your people deserve wrath. Well, now that Christ has rendered satisfaction for sin, no longer does he have anything to accuse us of, or his accusations fall on deaf ears, because Jesus has provided the justice necessary to save his people. A complete satisfaction of sins has been accomplished. And this effect shows God's authority is revealed. His salvation and power and the kingdom of God and the authority of Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb. So you see this conquering of God's people. It talks about that the saints, they're going to be witnesses for God. They're singing the song, but they're going to preserve to the end, that God's people will make it to the very end. And now we see Satan is full of wrath. Verse 12, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you dwell in them, but woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. And so Satan in 13 attacks the church, but the Lord protects his people. It's described as this dragon that comes down who pursues the woman. She's taken into this desert, and the serpent pours out this river towards them, but the earth swallows it up. And the dragon became furious and makes war on the rest of the offspring. So you see that the desert becomes this place for God's people. It's a sojourning. We're not at home here, and that's how Christians, we should somewhat feel. As much as we can enjoy the beauty and the benefits of this world, we know that this is ultimately not our home. But even though we're in this desert place, God still feeds his people, and the devil cannot destroy the people. He tries to engulf the church in his lies and his deception, this river of lies, but it doesn't work. This is really the millennium time we are in now, where the church experiences both good and bad. They experience the persecution from Satan, and they experience the special care from God. This is the Battle of Armageddon. This is the time period between Jesus' first coming and second coming. All the time that we're experiencing now is in these verses right here and the ones upcoming. And then in chapter 13, we see these helpers come, the helpers of the beast. The first one is this horrible monster. It talks about that he's got horns like a leopard, feet like a bear, mouth like a lion. He's got this power and authority. He's coming out of the sea, has this mortal wound that attracts people. And the second one is this other beast. Its mouth is haughty and blasphemous, but it looks nice and decent. It's blaspheming, but it has this. Sorry, that was verse 5. That's still describing the first beast. Verse 11. The second beast is rising out of the earth. It's two horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon. So we see these two beasts come along. The first is symbolic of Satan's strength. The second is symbolic of Satan's mind. The first represents this persecuting power of Satan operating through world governments. The second symbolizes the false religions and philosophies of the world that both oppose the church throughout this time. That picture of coming out of the sea represents nations or governments that symbolize the power of Satan through the governments of the world to persecute God's people. There are all these different forms, but ultimately it's the same beast. It describes a mortal wound that it has on one of its heads. There's these 7 anti-Christian empires, a continual line of anti-Christian groups. And while one empire ceases for a while, afterwards it resumes its formal role. A lot of people disagree on this, but this may be descriptive of John's experience with Nero, who's a cruel tyrant and then dies, and there's this somewhat of a peace. But then later, Emperor Domitian would again resume the persecution against God's people. But this anti-Christian government will conquer in 13:7 and rule over the earth and have complete influence, and yet the church will still endure. It seems to be saying that there is a time when the church will be so battered and beaten by the world that it have very little ability to speak and make a difference. Now that may be worldwide, or that may be at different times and periods in different nations. But the church is still called to endure in that. That second beast is the false prophet that we see in chapter 19, verse 20. It symbolizes these false philosophies, false religions. Now, outwardly it seems nice. It's got 2 horns like a lamb. It looks like a lamb, smells like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon. It is attractive. It seems innocent. And this is where it can become very deceptive. And we should be aware of that, where there's direct persecution and attack, but there's also deception that comes in. It seems right. But the devil, Satan, will use his mind to trick people, to fool them into thinking that everything is okay. I mean, it talks about that in this, that it performs great signs, that he deceives those on the earth, that it points to worshiping the first beast. All of this is symbolic of this deceptive work of Satan to draw people away from God and away from Christ. It seems attractive, but it is not innocent at all. And then we see this mark of the beast that comes up, those that are marked of the beast. In verse 16, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand and the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for its number is of a man, and the number is 666. Some manuscripts even have it as 616. It may be that, but we'll just go with 666 for now, for argument's sake. This mark of the beast just like the Lamb of God seals his people, these followers of the beast get a mark. It's not the same. It's a mark versus a seal, but it's still there, and it marks them as slaves of him, as set apart for him. They worship the beast and they get the mark. They worship the things of this world. They are deceived by the false religions. They belong to this God opposing, Christ rejecting spirit of the Antichrist. And whenever and whatever time period that it shows itself, it's not a specific thing that is going to come. Of late, there's been a lot of conspiracy theories saying that the COVID vaccine is a way of putting a chip inside of you that will get you to buy and sell and all this kind of stuff. That is not what's going on here. That is just conspiracy theory based on a misunderstanding of what it's talking about with this mark. The mark is very similar to the Christian mark. It's a seal. It's setting that these people are Satan's people. And it marks on their head and their hand, and so that they will attack the people of God, the church, with their mind, the head, and with their actions, hand, or one or the other. They will persecute the church, and it will affect people financially. That it's saying that there's a financial benefit to having the mark of the beast, and for those that don't, that it is going to be hard on them financially. So you see this persecution on a lot of different levels going on God's people, and at different times in different ways it has come about. We may not be in America feeling that same kind of persecution where we can't necessarily buy and sell things, and it may not come in our lifetime in that same kind of way, but we have seen other people that have felt that same kind of weight, that same kind of persecution in different ways. But this number 666, again, what does that mean? It's been kind of a scary number and used in a lot of horror films, but what are we actually talking about there? Well, in this number, 6 is the number of man, it says that, but 7 is the number of perfection. And 6 never gets all the way to 7. In other words, it fails. And so the number is failure, failure, failure. So what it's saying is they will fail. The number that's put on them, this mark that's put on them, is failure. And it's pointing to the people of God to say, don't be deceived by these things. Ultimately, they will fail. And then that's what we see in chapter 14, the triumph of the church. We see the Lamb in verse 1. Behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, with him 144,000 of who had his name and his father's name written on their forehead. So again, see another seal there. This is 144,000, which we talked about, that is God's people for all time. Jesus is standing in Zion in heaven, and there's the people are enjoying the blessedness of the final judgment. Not one of their number has been missing. The same 144,000, we see that same group. So Jesus conquers and wins, and none of his people have been conquered by the beast. They're sealed for God, and the church is triumphant. And that's what he's saying. It's going to be really hard to get the devil, the beast, Babylon, all these things coming at you, and guess what? You're going to win. You're going to conquer. And then in 6 through 13, there's this warning given to people. Notice that they're sitting, that this gospel goes out to every language and tribe and people, and these people are sitting and they need to wake up. They're not knowing that the judgment's coming, that that gospel is offered to them. They're warned that Babylon will fall, and that they will fall with Babylon. And that's where we see this great harvest arriving. That harvest is the coming judgment of God, which in 17 through 20 is fulfilled. Then another angel came out of the temple of heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Another angel came out from the altar, an angel that had authority over fire, and he called with a loud voice to one who had the sharp sickle, put your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth. Its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle around the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth, and threw it in the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress is trodden outside of the city, and blood flows from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. So, this is the final judgment of the wicked. The judgment has come. The wrath of God is described as the crushing of grapes. And notice this number 1600. It's if you take it and break it down, you can divide it into 2 4s and 2 10s. 4 is like the number of the universe or the earth, the 4 corners of the globe. 10 is a number of completeness, and so it's kind of saying complete, total annihilation of the judgment on the wicked. It's the full judgment of God that's being thrown down. It's being pictured here. So in this judgment of God, it's final and complete. So there is this warning. There's a time of warning, but now the judgment has come, and it will be terrible for those who sit under the judgment of God. So what are a couple things that we can learn from this? What are a couple things that maybe we can take home and apply to our lives? First, Satan attacks the church directly with persecution and also indirectly with false philosophies. We need to be aware of both those things. Sometimes we think of persecution just as being arrested, but that's not the only kind of persecution that Satan attacks with. He also attacks with empty, vain, false philosophies that would try to draw us away, or would be very popular with the world, but and the world calls us to believe those things, and we as the church have to stand for the truth, and that's what we're called to do, to endure to the end, to trust that what God has promised is better, to trust that His provision is better, to trust that His word is better. And Satan is going to attack in different ways, and so though we might hear these false philosophies, we have to endure. And in that, we need to be about teaching our children the truth. We need to be about teaching them how to defend the Word of God, how to answers to different hard questions that they're going to get. So, second thing, Satan will ultimately fail, so don't put your hope in this world or the things of this world. We have to be careful as Christians not to put our hope in the things of this world, that this world will get better, that we can change this world, that things will turn out right. Satan does seem to conquer, but ultimately he does fail. And we should put our hope in the things and the systems of this world. Now, that doesn't mean that we just ignore those things, that we don't try to do what's right, that we don't call out wrong. We are to be witnesses for that. And we'll talk about that on this third thing. But ultimately, our hope cannot be this world. It can't be that our government will get better. It can't be that society will get better. It can't be that our individual lives or communities will necessarily get better. It may. God may be gracious in that, and we have seen things turn around from time to time. But our hope cannot be just here and now. Here and now is important. It is, and we should not ignore that. But our hope has to be in the final victory of Christ. And the third thing, the last thing we'll take from this, is until Christ comes, we are called to witness to His resurrection and endure to the end. So that's what I'm saying. Like, we are not simply to wait and kind of huddle in a corner, wait for Jesus to come back. We are to be about the work. We are to work until Jesus comes, as that hymn says. We are to be about sharing the gospel. We're about to be about building up our community with the goodness of the gospel, caring for people, caring for communities, caring for our world. We should not ignore those things. Those things are absolutely important, and we should be about them until Jesus returns. And we should stand up for what is right and call out what is wrong. Always with kindness and compassion, always calling people to come out of Babylon, to say, hey, come out, what God offers is better. We're never supposed to be jerks about it. And too often we can say, well, we're being witnesses, but really we're just being jerks. We are to speak the truth, absolutely, but to speak it with love and grace and kindness, and to realize that without the grace of God, we would have been under the deception of the devil. Many of us who became Christians later in life understand our deception, understand where we were deceived and where we were wrong. And therefore we know that without God's grace, we very well could continue in what's going on. So we should never have pride in our salvation. We should be proud of what the Lord has done, and we should speak about it, but not in what we have done, because God has done the work, and we trust ultimately in Him. So until Christ comes, we are to be a witness and endure. It's not going to be easy, but we endure with faith and hope, knowing that at the end, Christ wins. And that's the great hope of Revelation, that in the end, Christ wins. So however we take this book, again, we talked about at the beginning, there's several different ways to take this book, but in the end, Christ wins. And that is our great hope. And I hope that it's encouraging to you.